Hey guys, welcome to the first installment of some lantern videos to help those who are new to the hobby learn how to do a semi-restoration and just kind of get these running, that way they last longer. This is a 242C September 1949 model. I've already wiped down the globe, but I'm going to kind of show how to take it apart, shine up this nickel, and get it running again. First thing you're going to want to do is take off this vent nut. This one's kind of different than some of the other ones, but basically they're all the same. You kind of screw them apart. I try to keep all the parts organized so I don't lose anything. I'll set up like a shop towel and place the parts on it. The next step is on the 200As, you're going to have to pull this out to remove the vent, but on this one there's a cutout, so you can just remove the vent. So we'll go ahead and do that. Next thing you're going to have to do is remove the bail. Sometimes these can kind of get rusted in place and stuck, but essentially all it is you pull them out like so. Just be careful not to let them come back on the globe. This is an original sunshine globe for a 200A or earlier. And how you know that is it's going to have Coleman with the sunshine coming over the mountains there. It's a Pyrex, so this is going to be an original globe. You want to be careful with those. They're hard to find. So now we have what's kind of a basic single mantle setup. This one's different. You have this cast piece. But basically what we're going to do is start removing it, and I'll identify some of the parts as we go. First thing I'm going to go ahead and do is remove the generator. It's usually a tube. It's going to be located underneath where an air pickup would be. This uses a 7/16 wrench on the nut. Simply remove that. Once you lift the nut up, you're going to see that it's attached with a little elbow to a tip cleaner eccentric block. This one is not. So it's probably why somebody stopped using it at some point or another. In order to get this out of this particular model, you're going to have to shimmy it out of the way. And if it doesn't come out, that means you have to remove the frame to remove it. And if you look down in here, you'll see that whoever had this lantern part last tried to get it running, but they didn't hook this up right. This is what's going to be inside of your generator. There's a small tip on the top that cleans it, and that's the hook that would hook onto this eccentric block here. I don't know if you can see that. That's what makes it go up and down. There's also some packing inside of these generators that sometimes can be difficult to remove, such as this one. And you don't always have to remove it, but if you're going to soak your generator tube in any kind of cleaning substance like vinegar and water, you're going to want to remove that packing. This may not even run with this generator, but we're going to try it before I remove it. Next thing we're going to do is take this nut off that's holding the frame on. It's a 7/16. Your lantern might be more rusty than this one. This one's in pretty good condition. This whole assembly just comes right off. Next we've got your collar. When you're removing this, if your lantern's painted, be careful because you don't want to scratch that paint off around here. It is easy to kind of do that. In order to get this off, I'm going to remove the valve assembly. It's going to be a 1/2 inch. You're going to unscrew the valve all the way, and as well as the nut holding it on. Inside of these, there's going to be a graphite seal. You want to check the condition of that and be careful not to damage it. If it is damaged, you can order a new one from Old Coleman Parts. That's where I get pretty much everything Coleman related that I need for these lanterns. Next thing I'm going to do is remove the collar. You just kind of shimmy it out of the way and you have it removed. I have no reason to take the valve assembly out of the fount at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it in. But now we have a couple more things to remove so that I can clean up the nickel. The caps generally come right off. They're going to be either a one piece or a two piece, and you're going to really want to check the condition of the seal in the cap. If that seal's bad and it leaks fuel under operation, you can have a gas fire on your hands. So definitely inspect that and make sure that it is okay to use. This one looks like it's in pretty decent condition, but we'll do a leak test before we verify that. The older model Colemans will have screws holding the pump assembly in. Make sure not to over torque these, they will strip out. Put these screws somewhere safe where you're not going to lose them. They come right out. And then pull on the cap, pull the bump out. This one actually looks in really good condition. So just a quick wipe down on this will probably do. And just for good measure, you can remove the stem that holds it in place and wipe it down. Inspect the tube for any debris that may be in there or any dirt or grime. At the bottom of it there is a check valve. You don't always have to remove it, but if you do, they make a special tool to do so because it's very difficult to remove without stripping it out. The next thing we're going to do is give this a good wipe down and kind of see where we are as far as the nickel and to what extent we're going to need to go to get it cleaned. I use invisible glass. It's kind of an all-purpose cleaner. I use it on all my lanterns just because it's a good cleaner. I like to have shop towels handy and spare ones, spare dirty ones. Just kind of give it a good wipe down. You're going to want to have some steel wool on hand when you're taking these lanterns apart for the brass pieces, and sometimes the nickel depending on the condition. This one looks in decent condition, but it does have a lot of spotting and oxidization. So we're going to clean that, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that today. Due to the oxidization on the nickel, I'm going to use some oven cleaner and a nylon brush. Don't use anything too aggressive with the oven cleaner. You could risk removing the nickel plating. I'm just going to take this oven cleaner, spray a little bit on, brush it in, and wipe it off. You don't want to leave it on there for too long. Oven cleaner can be an aggressive cleaner. But you want to get all that. See how it's turning brown? It's just dirt and grime and stuff that's been sitting on there for years and years. And this is the, well, one of the better ways to get it removed without removing any of the nickel plating. So you're really just kind of getting that top layer off. So I'm just going to go around the entire fount a couple times and do a couple coats of this and get all of this grime and oxidization off. And then we'll move on to the next step. The next step is going to be to use this polish and some superfine steel wool to get some more of this polished up. The cleanliness and shininess of your nickel is really going to just depend on how much time you spend on it, just like a wax job or a polish job on a car. It's really going to depend on the amount of time that you spend. You can go around this thing 5 or 6 times with the oven cleaner and a brush, as long as you're gentle, and it'll just continue to get cleaner until it starts to remove the nickel, so be careful. But basically, it just depends on how shiny you want it to be. All I'm going to do is take some fresh steel wool. I'm going to use some of this semi-chrome polish. It seems to work pretty well for me. You can wear gloves if you like. I normally don't, but and then you just kind of gently start to rub it into the nickel. I emphasize on the gentleness because you don't know if this has ever been polished before, and you really don't want to wear through that nickel, and it really just depends on the condition. We're just going to do a little bit at a time. You don't want to go doing the entire fount just to see that it's not working for you. It's like waxing a car. You do half the hood, then the other half. You just start a little bit at a time. You'll see it took off a lot more of that oxidization there. You can see the difference just right here. You can start to see a reflection, and you can feel how smooth it is. So I'm just going to continue to do basically what I did right there around the entire fount until I feel like it is to my level with this step. Don't go too crazy yet because we're not to the last step. So you can already start to see the improvement over when we started. Again, I'll say it really just depends on how much time you want to spend. I'm not a perfectionist in regards to how shiny my nickel is, but you can spend as much time as you like polishing the nickel, and it'll usually shine up pretty nice depending on the condition of the lantern when you start. The next step for me is going to use the same exact polish. I'm going to put it on a cotton towel, just an old t-shirt, and I'm then going to use that to buff into the nickel just like I did with the steel wool, but this is a less aggressive buffing method. And for me, this is kind of the final step of polishing. Some people will use a wax, some type of wax finish. It just depends on what kind of polishing compound or wax compound you want to use. And it also, again, depends on what condition you want your nickel to be in. But essentially, I'm just going to buff this in until all of the buffing cream is gone. It's going to have a light haze, and you can see all the grime that we still picked up. And I use a microfiber towel because they are great. And you're just going to wipe away the residue left from the polishing cream, and you'll see how much shinier it is compared to when we started. It's, you know, 10 times better, and I'm happy with this. This is the other side that's still unpolished with that last step. Still nice, but this is the final step. Again, depends on how shiny you want your nickel to be. You can spend as much time as you like. So now that we have this polished up, basically going to reassemble it. But before I do that, we have an opportunity to go through and clean each individual part. Basically, all I'm going to do for this step is I'm going to take a superfine steel wool and all of the brass parts that are dingy, I'm going to gently wipe them down or aggressively as you need, depending on how dirty it is. All the brass parts, any castings, the burner, anything that has rust on it, and just kind of clean it up the best I can. Use a basic cleaner, go through, clean everything down. If your brass is super dirty and it has a lot of soot, disassemble it the best you can and put only the brass parts in a, I don't know, half and half mixture of warm water and vinegar. Let that soak for 6 hours up to overnight, depending on how bad the, you know, like this, depending on how bad that is and how clean you want it to be. Let it soak overnight, and just make sure all you're putting in the water and vinegar mixture is just the brass parts. When you take it out the next day, wipe it down, it's going to have a bit of a pinkish hue to the brass. That's okay. Basically, you'll just take your steel wool and buff off that film from the vinegar, and it's going to look good as new. And again, it just depends on how clean you want your lantern to be. I just want this one to run and look half decent, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to clean up all these parts with some steel wool, some invisible glass spray, and some shop towels. Wipe it all down, and when I'm all done with that, we'll go ahead and reassemble. Now that I've got everything pretty much wiped down to my cleanliness standards, I'm going to go ahead and reassemble, and I will show you how I'm going to do that as I go. You could spend weeks cleaning every little part for your lantern if you want to, but for me personally, in this particular case, I'm pretty happy with it the way that it is. So I'm just going to slip the collar back on. Again, if you got paint, be careful with how aggressive you are with this collar, because you can very easily start scratching the paint. Not so much with the nickel, it's pretty resilient. If your graphite seal was good in here, go ahead and screw it back in, just the knob portion, until it is essentially closed. Then you're going to take this and start threading it until you can't do it with your fingers anymore. Take your 1/2-inch wrench. You don't want to go too tight with this because you can destroy that graphite seal. So I would just kind of go until you start to feel a bit of resistance, and then start to slow down. And that's probably good right there. Don't go too tight because you will destroy that graphite seal, and then it'll be no good. So it's pretty snug. It's hard to unscrew this, so I've gone too tight. So I'm going to take my 1/2 inch and I'm going to go back about a 1/4 turn. Then I'm going to test again. You want it to be just rigid enough to screw and unscrew. If it's too loose, it's going to leak. If it's too tight, you won't be able to unscrew it, and you risk destroying that graphite seal. This actually, when the lantern gets hot, these parts expand, and it actually gets easier to manipulate this valve. Not that you're going to be doing much of that during operation, but it's something to be aware of. So now that that's installed, our collar is in place. I'll go ahead and reinstall the pump. So there's other folks who have done videos on the pumps, so I'm just going to do this briefly. Essentially, you're just going to take some needle nose. On this model, there's a little square. It just unscrews. Okay, it's just basically a square washer. I wish they would have not used a square washer because it'd be kind of difficult to remove with pliers. But take that off, kind of wipe it down. Make sure there's no gunk on it. You want that tube to be pretty clean. You're going to take your leather pump cup. If it's destroyed, you're going to need another one. If it's still good, you just flip it inside out just like that. Some people use linseed oil and neat's foot oil or something like that. I use motor oil and it works fine, and I'm sure some people would gasp at that, but I've used motor oil on all my lanterns for my leather cups, and I don't know, it works fine for me. So basically you're going to take that oil and you're going to put it around the rim and around the inside, and you don't want it to be glopped on to where it's dripping, but you want it to have a healthy coat so that it will slide in this tube without any resistance. So I'm going to go ahead and oil this and reassemble this, and I'll show you how we put it back in the lantern. So it's freshly oiled, and now we're going to reinsert it into the lantern. Before you put this in, you got to make sure your guide rod is in place. That just screws down into the check valve. It's kind of hard to mess up. You find the hole, screw it in with your fingers until it's just snug. Take your pliers, put it on one side of the block, and just kind of give it just one little snug to where it's tight in there. The center of this tube goes over that block, and this is the hard part. If you've just flip your pump cup around, you're gonna have to kind of feed that leather in just right, and it can be kind of a pain, but that's how you know you're gonna get a good seal. Once you kind of get it on there, you line up your tube with that block and go ahead and push that down into the tube. Before you put the screws back in, unscrew it a couple times. Just kind of feel that there's not a ton of resistance in the check valve to unscrew and screw in. Also, kind of give it some pumps. You're not going to build any pressure, obviously, because you don't have a cap, but you can put your thumb over it and just kind of check to see if you're building any pressure. If you're not, then you might have a problem with your check valve. So in my case, that is the case. I'm not building any pressure. So either I've done something wrong with my pump cup, or my check valve isn't building any pressure. So we're going to go ahead and troubleshoot that, so we get some bonus in this video. Okay, so I may have a problem with my check valve. So the way that I'm going to try and figure out what's going on with that, I don't have a special tool. So I'm going to take this long screwdriver with a fairly wide tip, and I'm going to look down into this tube. And what's at the bottom is there's going to be a brass screw with a couple notches in it. And I'm going to push down as hard as I can and turn to unscrew this valve. This is not an easy task, and if you're lucky, it will come apart, like mine did. I sprayed some brake cleaner in there, and then I sprayed some arrow coil. It's probably one of the best products to use for a screw that's stuck. So I was able to get the check valve out. Now I can kind of inspect it. There's a little ball right here. Sometimes those get rusted in place. This one seems to be just fine. Check valve came out nice and easy. Now that I have that out, I can go ahead and inspect this tube and I'll probably spray it out with some brake cleaner and let that dry and reinstall the check valve. So I've got my check valve reinstalled. I'm going to go ahead and put my pump cup back in. Line up the holes. So now I can see, just by covering the fill cap open with my finger and pumping the lantern, I can see that it is now building pressure. So I'm going to kind of reset this collar since I moved it around a bit when I was getting everything going here. So I'm going to get this collar reset where I need it and reinstall the screws here and go from there. Before we go any further, I want to check for leaks. The first type of leak we're going to check for is an air leak. So you're going to make sure your cap's nice and tight, this is on properly, your valve is closed, and your centric block is pointed up. That means that there shouldn't be any air passing through anything. So I'm going to go ahead and pump it 20 times. I'm going to close the valve, and I'm going to listen carefully for any air leaks. I don't hear any air leaks, so now I'm going to loosen the cap valve just enough to where I can see that, or hear rather, that there is pressure in the tank. I didn't hear any pressure in the tank, so that's not a good sign. That means that there might be an air leak that I can't detect. So I'm going to pump it up even further to see if I can get any sort of sound. The tank is empty, so it's going to take a lot more pressure to push air. I'm going to open the valve and let the block down. I don't hear anything. I don't feel anything. So it's either not building pressure or there's an air leak. So I don't know where that air leak is. You can do two things. You can do a dunk test, which you would put pressure in the tank with your pump, put it underneath water, and see where the bubbles are coming out. Or you can put fuel in it and go do it about that way, because the fuel will come out. You'll be able to hear the fuel coming out. And I'm going to do it that way. Alright, I got fuel in the tank. Let's put some pressure in here and see what we can get to happen. You can see that there's fuel bubbling up out of where it's supposed to. And if I open this, it's going to continue to come out. So there's fuel coming out there. The other spot you want to check is here where this screws in. You want to make sure that there's no fuel coming out there. That's a common place. If that graphite seal is bad, it'll leak. Oh, we've got quite a leak coming. Oh, it's just coming out of there. So that's because I had the arm down. So it's okay. Fuel dries pretty quick. It may cause you to not like your nickel polish that you just did, because it can take some of that polish off, but it's not the end of the world. Let's do that again. That fuel's still coming out pretty good because this is open all the way. So we're going to close that. So we got fuel coming out, and that's a good thing. We're building pressure. When this is up, there should hardly be anything if anything, coming out of that tube. So we want to check to make sure that you're not getting any fuel out of the cap area. And it looks like we're probably good. So I'm going to go ahead and relieve that pressure from the cap. And we'll go ahead and reassemble the rest. Alright, so we're going to take our pre-assembled lower portion, we're going to take our burner, and we're going to line it up properly. This part's actually easier. Before you screw this frame down, you put your generator in. Line your tip cleaner up, put it into your generator, and I'm not sure if this generator is going to be any good, but we're going to try it. We're going to insert it into the frame, lower this down, hook that little arm into the hole in the eccentric block. And if you've gone this far, you're going to know what that means, because you're going to see it when you have everything disassembled. It's important to have that arm in there, otherwise it defeats the purpose of having a tip cleaner. Could be kind of tricky. Alright, so we've got that in, and I forgot to install a generator nut. So I'm gonna have to take this back off and do that. I just thought of another way to install the frame, a lot easier. You basically take your generator, you hook the tip on, you screw your generator nut down, make sure it's lined up properly. That's the extra step here because you don't have the frame to help with the alignment. And this is not wanting to go back. There we go. And this generator's actually bent a little bit, which is interesting. It's probably why the packing wouldn't come out. But we're gonna try to use it. We're gonna see what happens. I'm gonna tighten that down just a hair. Now we're gonna slide the frame over and see if we can get everything lined up. Looks like everything's lining up all right so far. That generator is bent, so I don't know how that happened, but these lanterns are pretty old, so from 1949 till now, who knows how many times it's been taken apart. So remember to install the washer. And these 200A style lanterns are really easy to take the frame off of because it's just the one nut that holds it down, and that's pretty cool. Before you get a final torque, just make sure your collar's lined up. Just a little adjustments that are noticeable afterhand. These don't need to be wrenched down super tight, just snug. If you put it too tight, you could strip this out, you could mess up the paint here, the collar, you could crush the collar, you could bend the frame. Just snug. Don't go too crazy. So we've pretty much got it reassembled. We can go ahead and test it now, and I'm going to show you how I test it without a mantle. You don't have to have the mantle on there to test it. Make sure your valve is closed, you've got fuel in the tank, your cap is screwed all the way down tight, and go ahead and start putting pressure in. Go ahead and do about 15 pumps. Now this lantern's probably hasn't been lit in 15 years. I'm going to spin this tip cleaner around 5 or 6 times, leave it pointing down. I hear a pressure leak coming from the cap. So I'm going to fix that, because if I light this up with a leak here, it could start a fire. So I'm going to go ahead and fix that first. Alright, so I used an O-ring to seal that up. It's not exactly proper. If you want the proper seal for this particular cap, you can find it on this website right here, Old Coleman Parts. I pretty much order everything from there. Mike's a good dude. He always usually has everything I need. So I went ahead and just threw an O-ring in there for now. That way I could finish up this video for you guys. So I've got pressure in the tank. I'm going to go ahead and open the valve for about 3 or 4 seconds. You may hear some fuel coming up. You'll hear some bubbling, some tinking. Things are coming up in there. What I'm going to do is I'm now going to heat this generator up, and I'm going to do that with this torch. Again, this lantern probably hasn't been lit in about 15 years. And one of the things that gets this fuel to come up is these generators being nice and hot. And you can already see with the little bit of fuel that I put into there, it's already lighting up. So now you can start to open the valve. And you can see heat is really the key to getting these to run good. That's why they put the generators next to the flame. If the generator's not hot, it's not going to run good. Once it's lit, you can kind of open up the valve just as you would if there was a mantle, and you can kind of just let it start to heat up. Right now it's not running that great because that generator's not super hot yet. You can help it along. Take your torch again. Now you can kind of start to hear that normal lantern sound, that kind of light hiss. You want to keep an eye out at this stage for any leaks. Leaks are bad. Always have a fire extinguisher handy. This generator is not really in the best of condition, so the lantern's not really running that great. But essentially, that's all there is to it. I'm probably going to end up changing out this generator to a new one. This one's bent. Who knows what kind of torture that it had been put through previously. But when it comes to kind of doing a basic disassembly, reassembly, and firing it up, that's kind of all there is to it. It's not too difficult. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. Like, subscribe. I hope to be making more of these videos and using different model lanterns and kind of just making some more modern videos. I'd hate to see people stop collecting these just because they don't know how they work. The resources are out there, the parts are out there, the lanterns are out there, and they're fun. So thanks for watching.